Page 432, Progress with Problems. As more people moved more quickly along railways and waterways, the possibility of disaster also increased. Some tragic events occurred. The SS Central America was a 270-foot-side wheel steamer that carried passengers and cargo between New York and the Central American country of Panama. The ship traveled one part of a widely traveled route between the East Coast and California. In September 1857, the Central America was carrying a full load of passengers and a large amount of gold when it steamed into a hurricane. The ship sank off the coast of the Carolinas, and hundreds of people drowned. The Great Train Wreck of 1856 occurred between Camp Hill and Fort Washington, Pennsylvania. On July 17, 1856, two trains slammed head-on into each other. An estimated 60 people were killed, and more than 100 were injured. At that point in time, it was considered one of the worst accidents in railroad history. The tragic news horrified the nation. Newspapers demanded that railroad companies improve their methods and equipment and make the safety of passengers their first concern. For the train, they did a lot of things to improve safety on trains, including adding signals, so that way a red signal would be up, so that way they knew another train was using that same track, so that way the conductor wouldn't continue using that track, and that way they wouldn't crash into each other head on. Unfortunately, in 2008, there was a really, really bad crash here in the San Fernando Valley in Chatsworth. The conductor, the person in charge of driving the train, was texting and didn't pay attention to the signal to let him know that there was another train on the same track that he was. Unfortunately, those two trains collided head-on, just like the train wreck of 1856, and a lot of people were killed. So they still, even though they had made safety improvements, unfortunately, every now and then we still have tragic accidents, but they've become a lot more rare. You can look up online the Chatsworth train accident of 2008. That was very difficult. I was staying at my mom's house in 2008, and she lived in Chatsworth, and I was home, and it was very near the train crash site. So I remember the whole house shook. It was very loud, and all the injured people going in. I remember seeing a lot of the injured people, and it was really difficult to see what happened after those two trains hit head on. There was indescribable damage and so many hurt, and unfortunately a lot dead as well. So, with transportation, each form of transportation has its own risks. Same thing once we advance later on, many years later, we'll add automobiles for transportation, and those have even more accidents, and those are much more common. So every form of transportation has its risk. And again, people work to study how to make them safer. So after this accident, the train wreck of 1856 and the train crash 2008, they've made railroads safer since then. The safety has improved on railroads, as well as people working on trying to make cars safer. Like they're looking into more safety efforts, like the notifications on cars if someone's in the other lane or that kind of thing. So technology is always trying to improve to try and keep up with the problems of transportation, because unfortunately we still have frequent accidents with transportation, whether it's cars, railroads, airplanes. That's something that we've always worked to reduce. So let's take a look at communications breakthroughs. Actually, before we go to that, I do want to go to the map. Major railroads, 1860. Now, railroads were important not only for transporting people across the country, but they also allowed goods to be shipped greater distances than ever before. Number 1, exploring region. Which regions were least served by railroads in 1860? So if we take a look, you can see most of them are up here in the north. You don't see as many in the southern region, especially down here. Number 2, patterns of movements. Looking at the map, you can see that most of the railroad mileage runs between eastern and western points. Why do you think that is? So why are they going? So you can see the compass goes east, so this way, and then west is to that way. So a lot of them are going east to west in this direction. And you can kind of tell, well, if you look at the Mississippi River, that's going north and south. So they already have that for transportation for north and south. So they don't need a railroad to go along that. People can just travel along the river. So, and because of the Atlantic Ocean, north and south, people can just travel that way. So it's just easier to travel this way. But there's not too many waterways to travel in this area. So you can see that's where the trains are, where there aren't rivers. It makes those connections. All right. Communications breakthroughs. Let's take a look before we start this one. I want to look at the vocabulary words. We have the telegraph and Morse code. The growth of industry and the new pace of travel created a need for faster methods of communication. The telegraph, a device that used electric signals to send messages, filled that need. Samuel Morse, an American inventor, developed a system for sending coded messages instantly along electrical wires. After Morse showed his system could send messages over a short distance, Congress gave him money to test the device over a wider area. Morse strung wires between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland. On May 24, 1844, he was ready to try out his system. A crowd of people watched as Morse tapped out the words, "What hath God wrought?" on his telegraph system. A few moments later, the operator in Baltimore sent the same message back in reply. Morse's telegraph had worked. Telegraph operators sent messages quickly by using Morse code. This code uses different arrangements of short and long signals, dots and dashes, to represent letters of the alphabet. Telegraph companies formed and workers put up telegraph lines across the country. By 1852, there were about 23,000 miles, or 37,015 kilometers, of telegraph lines in the United States. The telegraph allowed information to be communicated in minutes rather than days. People could quickly learn about news and events from other areas of the United States. The telegraph also allowed businesses to become more efficient with production and shipping. So let's look at determining meaning. In the context, it is used here that the word code means a system of symbols of signals used for communication. The word Morse is capitalized, indicating that it is a person's name and or brand name. Uses information to explain the meaning of the term Morse code. All right, let's look at checking for understanding. Number 1, inferring. How do you think the invention of the telegraph changed life in the United States? So what did that mean for people now that they could suddenly communicate a lot faster? If you wanted to send a message to someone who lived far away, it would take days to send them a message. And then now, you could send a telegraph, and they could get that message pretty much instantly. So that was a huge, huge deal. Number 2, explain cause and effect. How did canals and railways transform trade in the interior of the United States? So it just allowed them to move more quickly from, again, east to west, and just generally improving trade. So it became easier to buy and sell things because now they can ship it faster. Farming innovations. Guiding question. What changes made agriculture more profitable in the 1830s? In the early 1800s, few farmers were willing to settle in the treeless Great Plains west of Missouri, Iowa, and Minnesota. Even areas of mixed forest and prairie west of Ohio and Kentucky seemed too difficult for farming. Settlers worried that their old plows could not break the prairie's matted sod. They also worried that the soil would not be fertile enough to support fields of crops. Advancements in agriculture. Three inventions of the 1830s helped farmers overcome difficulties in farming the land. As a result, settlement expanded throughout the wider areas of the Midwest. One of these inventions was the steel-tipped plow, developed by John Deere in 1837. This allowed farmers to cut through the hard-packed prairie sod of the Great Plains. Now, John Deere is still a well-known brand to this day for farming equipment. So let's look a little bit more about John Deere. Biography. So here's his picture right here. Born in 1804, died in 1886. John Deere was born in Vermont. He trained as a blacksmith but found it difficult to make a living in his home state. He traveled in the state of Illinois in the 1830s. There he learned that farmers were having a difficult time plowing the region's rich but sticky soil with the rough iron plows of the day. Deere began making a polished steel plow that performed much better. Within 10 years, Deere was selling 1,000 plows per year. He was quoted as saying, "I will never put my name on a product that does not have in it the best that is in me." Drawing conclusions. What can you conclude about the benefit of Deere's invention for his farmer customers?